Think about the happiest memory from your childhood. Maybe it's running outside until the streetlights came on. Maybe it's a birthday cake or laughing so hard your stomach hurt. Now imagine never having that. Imagine being 5 or 7 or 10 years old, and instead of playing, you were worrying. Instead of being taken care of, you were the one taking care of everyone else. That was real life for some children. And many of them grew up, became adults, and still carry the weight of a childhood they never got to have. This is their story. The child who grew up too fast. There's a word for what happened to these children. It's called parentification. It's when a child is forced not by choice, but by circumstance to take on the emotional or physical role of an adult. To become the caretaker, the problem solver, the one who keeps things together when everything around them is falling apart. It doesn't always look the same. Sometimes it's a child who cooks dinner every night because a parent is too depressed to get out of bed. Sometimes it's a kid who listens to their mother cry about her marriage problems, night after night, becoming her emotional support at age 8. Sometimes it's subtler. A child who learns very early that being happy, being loud, being a kid is somehow wrong. That they need to be quiet, mature, responsible, because the adults around them simply couldn't handle anything more. These children didn't choose this, but they adapted to it. And that adaptation changed them in ways that would last for the rest of their lives. The psychology of what happens inside. Here's what researchers and psychologists have found about children who grow up too fast. When a child is placed under adult-level stress, their nervous system responds. The brain begins to wire itself around one central goal: survival, not play, not exploration. The prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for joy, creativity, and imagination, gets less activation. Meanwhile, the stress response system stays on high alert almost all the time. In simple terms, the brain of a parentified child is always watching, always scanning for danger, always preparing for the next problem. And here's the most painful part: these children often don't know anything is wrong because they were praised for it. They were called so mature for their age. They were told they were responsible, strong, special, and they believed it. They had to. Because believing it was the only way to make sense of the weight they were carrying. The invisible wound, emotional neglect. There's something that often walks alongside parentification, and it's one of the most misunderstood forms of childhood pain. It's called emotional neglect. Unlike physical neglect, emotional neglect leaves no visible marks. There are no bruises, no obvious signs. In fact, from the outside, everything can look completely fine. The family might have had food on the table. The child might have gone to a good school. The parents might have even meant well. But inside that home, the child's emotional needs were invisible. No one asked how they were feeling. No one sat with them when they were scared. No one helped them understand that it was okay to be sad or angry or confused. Instead, they learned to suppress those feelings, to push them down, to keep going. And over time, that suppression becomes a habit, then a personality trait, then a way of life. They grow up not knowing how to name what they feel, or they feel numb, or they feel everything all at once and have no idea why. How it follows them into adulthood. Now fast forward 20 years, that child is now an adult. They have a job, maybe a family of their own. They seem fine. Maybe they seem more than fine. Maybe they seem incredibly capable, incredibly put together. But something doesn't quite fit. They find it almost impossible to ask for help, not because they're too proud, but because somewhere deep inside, asking for help feels dangerous. It feels like weakness, or like a burden on others. They overfunction in relationships. They give and give and give and then feel resentful when no one gives back, not because they're selfish, but because they never learned that receiving love was allowed. They struggle to rest. Sitting still feels wrong. Being unproductive feels almost like a moral failure. Because as a child, their value is tied entirely to what they did, not who they were. They might be high achievers, driven, responsible, reliable. The person everyone turns to. But inside, there's an exhaustion that runs so deep they can barely explain it. And sometimes, in quiet moments, there's a grief that surfaces. A grief for something they can't quite name. It's the grief of a childhood they never got to live. The effect on relationships. The patterns don't just live inside them, they spill into every relationship they form. Many adults who were parentified children become natural caretakers. They're drawn to people who need help, to relationships where they can be needed, because being needed is familiar, being needed is safe. It's the one role they always knew how to play. But when a relationship becomes equal, when someone actually tries to take care of them in return, it can feel deeply uncomfortable. Even suffocating. Some shut down, some push people away. Some convince themselves they don't need anyone at all, and in romantic relationships this often plays out in painful ways. They might constantly put their partner's needs first, while quietly starving for their own needs to be met. They might stay in relationships that drain them because leaving feels like abandonment. And abandonment is something their nervous system will do almost anything to avoid. Or on the other side, they might keep people at a distance, never letting anyone get too close. Because getting close means being vulnerable, and being vulnerable means getting hurt. And they've been hurt enough. The missing self, there's one more layer to this that doesn't get talked about enough. When a child spends their developmental years focused entirely on others, managing their parents' emotions, keeping the family together, being the responsible one, they miss something crucial. They miss the chance to figure out who they are. Childhood isn't just about fun. It's the time when a person experiments with identity. They try different things, fail at them, discover what they love. They develop a self. But a parentified child doesn't have the space to do that. Their identity becomes defined by what they can do for others, by how well they perform, by how little trouble they cause. So when they reach adulthood and someone asks them, "What do you actually want?" they often don't know, not because they haven't thought about it, but because they never had the freedom to find out. Here's what I want you to take from this. If any part of this felt familiar, if you recognized yourself in the child who was always responsible, always strong, always taking care of everyone else, I want you to know something. What happened to you was not normal, and it was not your fault. Being called mature for your age was not a compliment. It was a sign that something was being asked of you that should never have been asked. You deserve to be a child. You deserve to be messy and loud and carefree. You deserved adults who held you up, not the other way around. And the fact that you carried all of that and still made it here, that isn't something to be proud of in the way you've always been told. It's something to grieve and then gently let go of, because healing for you isn't about doing more. It's about finally learning to do less, to receive, to rest, to allow yourself to be human in the ways you never could as a child. The work of healing is learning, for the very first time, that you are enough, not because of what you do, but simply because of who you are. And that perhaps is the childhood gift you finally get to give yourself now.